Hi there guys, my name is Jacob and welcome back to the channel. Now today's video is going to be about heat pumps and more specifically, am I going to get a heat pump in 2026? Now I made a video maybe a month or two ago where I said that I am looking into getting a heat pump installed at my house because ultimately I would love to be able to get rid of the gas, cap off the gas and just go all electric. Because of course I've got solar panels, I've got a battery, I've got an EV charger. Everything in my house is electric apart from the central heating. So to me, in my mind, it makes sense to get rid of the gas boiler, cap off the gas, get an electric heat pump and just be all electric. So that was kind of my goal for 2026, to get this whole situation sorted, get an installer, booked in and get it all swapped out, ready for winter. But that has not gone to plan, so I'm going to explain in this video why. Now, as part of the process of getting a heat pump, I'd worked out exactly where I wanted the heat pump to sit. I'd worked out where I was going to have the water tank installed, and I'd kind of prepped all those areas. So it would be really easy for an installer to come in, measure up and give me a quote. And as part of that quoting process, I managed to get 3 different installers to come and quote. Now, the very first one I got in was a company called Era. Now, I know this is a bit of a premium brand, but they're kind of new to the UK, or at least they kind of, that's what they advertise. I think in the last year or two, that's when they've kind of started working in the UK. But they are more of a premium heat pump installer, so I did know this was going to be expensive. I didn't realise it was going to be quite as expensive as it was. However, we'll get to that. Era came in, I'll be honest, they did a great survey. They were very thorough, provided a lot of different information, measured all the radiators. They came to the conclusion that I would need 2 radiators swapped. To be honest, I agreed with that because the 2 that they identified I know are a little bit small. And when you have a heat pump, of course, you want bigger radiators, bigger surface area, because that's kind of how heat pumps work. They work at a lower overall temperature, but you have bigger radiators and you just kind of keep it on longer, rather than gas boilers where you run at a really high temperature for sort of short bursts, or at least that's my understanding. Now, as I say, I was really happy with Era's survey and I was happy with the equipment they were going to provide. So ultimately, it just came down to what was the price going to be. And unfortunately, the price was way higher than I ever thought a heat pump would be. Bear in mind, there is a grant in the UK right now that I believe is about £7,500. So that the first £7,500 of the install cost, you as the customer do not have to pay, which on the face of it is fantastic. And you would think that would make the install pretty cheap, but that is not the case, and it certainly wasn't with Era. So Era's total bill after the grant was going to be £6,800, and that, I'll be honest, was a shock and was not a price or even close to a price that I was willing to pay. So unfortunately, I crossed Era off my list pretty quick. I'm pretty sure I would have been very happy with the install they would have completed and the equipment that they provided as part of that install. But there's just no way I was going to pay £6,800. And I found it a little bit annoying as well, to be honest. Again, I know they're a premium installer and they say they provide premium equipment, and I have no doubt they probably do. However, the installer made it quite clear on the survey part that the survey would be a relatively simple install, and he said it many times, and he compared it to other jobs where they were more complex and it involved a lot more work than my job did, and it kind of led me to believe that the quote was going to be fairly cheap. Well, not cheap, but you know what I mean, a bit more reasonable. But ultimately that wasn't the case. So 6,800, okay, cross that off the list, move on. The second installer I had was Octopus. Now, again, I don't know why, but maybe naively, I thought Octopus was going to provide me a really reasonable quote from things I'd read online, and with them being such a large installer, you know, they're the biggest energy company in the UK, I really thought this was the one that I would probably end up going with. But to be honest, I had a bad experience from when the survey took place, and I did make a video on this about a month ago. But to be honest, I took that video off the channel because I was just getting hounded by people for various different reasons, and I just took it down. I thought, I can't be bothered with this. But anyway, the Octopus Energy survey I was not happy with. They came to the conclusion that I would need many radiators changed in my house, which was completely contradictory to what the ERA surveyor had said. I agreed with the ERA surveyor that I needed probably 2 radiators changed, but the Octopus surveyor, I think he said I needed 8, which was nearly all of the radiators in my house would need changing. But what annoyed me the most was I've got some larger radiators, especially upstairs, and I would have thought those larger radiators would be fit for purpose and fantastic for a heat pump. And that is exactly what the ERA surveyor said. But the Octopus surveyor wanted to swap them out for significantly smaller radiators. Now that goes against everything I have read about heat pumps needing a larger surface area running at a cooler temperature. He wanted to put in radiators that were nearly half the size of the ones I have, and he said that is best for a heat pump. It seemed contradictory to almost everything I've read, and I did dispute this with Octopus after the surveyor had gone. I spoke to their customer service, where, you know, they have kind of heat pump specialists who create these packages and create heat pump systems. And after a bit of back and forth, I managed to get to the point where they basically agreed that 2 radiator changes were required and the rest wasn't, which I found really weird, because I'm like, well, why did the surveyor say it was if someone in the office is saying they're not? Ultimately, I didn't get to the bottom of why that was, but it didn't give me a lot of confidence, I've got to say, in going with Octopus. I also didn't like some of the things they were saying about the positioning of the heat pump, because again, it contradicted what the ERA guy had said. And it led me to believe, like, who do I trust? Do I trust the first guy or the second guy? You know, they're both kind of giving me contradictory information. And again, it just, as a customer, it didn't give me a lot of trust and, you know, think that I'm who to go for, who's going to be the most reliable, who is giving me the correct information. It's hard to know. And I know it's a new industry and there's lots of differing opinions about what is best, but I think maybe it's a little too early to know and to be absolutely sure. And as a customer who doesn't know all that much about heat pumps, it made it hard for me to have confidence in progressing. So anyway, I got to Octopus's quote, and again, their quote shocked me. I know the surveyor quoted for a lot of radiator changes, and you know, when factoring all that work in, their quote kind of made sense. Their initial quote came back at 4,400. So still substantially cheaper than ERA, but way more than I expected, because you got to remember that is on top of the grant. So they take the 7,500, and then me as the customer, I need to pay 4,400 on top. Again, I'll be honest, this was way more than I expected. And even the Octopus surveyor, he agreed with the ERA surveyor that this job, my house, installing a heat pump and a water tank, was a simple install, and there would not be a lot of new piping needed to pipe in the water tank, because it's going to go exactly where the boiler currently sits. And in terms of the heat pump, it would sit at the back of my utility, and it would require, I think he said, about 7 meters of new piping, which I think there's an input and an output pipe. So basically 2 pipes that would feed back to the main water tank and where water comes into the house, the main water feed. About 7 meters of new piping would be required. And then, of course, the heat pump and the water tank. But he said simple install, and made it feel as a customer like the quote was going to be reasonable, and it just wasn't. Well, not in my opinion anyway. And even after taking off the radiator changes, where he said I needed loads of radiator changes, we got back down to where I needed just 2. And again, the quote was still 3,900. Now, I don't know whether you as a viewer think that is reasonable, but I didn't. I was expecting, if I'm honest, somewhere around the £2,000 figure, maybe pushing 3. But that would have been I think 3 would have been my absolute top of what I was willing to pay. Now, maybe that's because my expectation was way off, and maybe it always was, I don't know. But that was just kind of what I'd looked at online and come to the conclusion that was what I was kind of looking at and expecting to pay. And, you know, none of the quotes got anywhere near that. So my best quote that I got from Octopus was 3,900, which, as I said, was more than I was willing to pay. And they were not willing to budge on that figure at all. So I moved on to my final installer, which was a local guy, more of an independent kind of guy. Again, I wasn't sure whether he was going to be expensive or cheap, but cutting a long story short, he was basically the same as Octopus. He came to the conclusion, 2 radiator changes, same heat pump placement, water tank, all the same. But he came to the figure, I want to say 4,200. So, you know, roughly the same as Octopus. And again, I was just like, oh, it's just too much. 4,200 on top of the 7,500 grant. It was just way more than I'd ever anticipated it costing. And I'll be honest, I was left really disappointed because I was really hoping that 2026 was going to be the year where I get my house all electric, cap off the gas, and have a heat pump and be ready for winter, where we could run the heat pump sort of 24/7 and have a consistent, stable, warm temperature throughout the winter. And I'll be honest, I was kind of looking forward to it because in my mind, I had planned for this to happen. I budgeted for it, I put money aside, and I was ready to commit to an installer that could give me a reasonable plan for a reasonable cost. And for the 3 that I used, in my opinion, I didn't get the reasonable cost that I was looking for. And it surprised me, to be quite honest, but ultimately left me pretty disappointed because I'm not going ahead with it. And I am hopeful that in the future, I will be able to get a heat pump and, you know, get the system that I want ultimately. But it's not going to be this year. And unless things drastically change, I can't see it happening in the near future either. It just seems too expensive, and a lot of different information of different installers contradicting one another. And until I get a sort of consistent knowledge base from whoever you speak to, they kind of tell you the same things. It just seems like everybody is working to a different standard. What someone thinks is a good system, someone else doesn't. What one person recommends, another person doesn't. And it's hard to know who to go with, who is telling the truth, and, you know, is the system ultimately going to perform well? It is hard to know, or at least I thought so as a customer that isn't all that clued upon heat pumps. I'm looking to the installer to provide that knowledge and provide that confidence, and I didn't get that from any of the installers that I got quotes for. So long story short, and it was a long story, but long story short, there will be no heat pump being installed in my house in 2026 or the near future. And that, you know, I'm sad to say that because I really wanted to get it done, but ultimately that is where I'm at. And, you know, I'm hopeful in the next couple of years, maybe things change. Maybe they do bring prices down, as a lot of people seem to be suggesting online. And you would think as they become more mainstream and more people get them, the price should come down. But what I find quite scary is, you know, the cheapest quote I got was 3,900, so call it £4,000. The average person cannot afford £4,000 to swap out their boiler for a heat pump. So it does leave me thinking, who are they targeting heat pumps at? because surely they want mass adoption. They want everybody to transition to a heat pump. But at that type of money, that's never going to happen. The cost needs to come down substantially. At the moment, I think it's mostly, comfortable sort of middle class households that can afford to just swap out the boiler for a heat pump because they want to, not because they necessarily need to. But the average person, especially with, the cost of living and everything as it is right now, is not going to, go through with a heat pump install after getting a quote of £4,000. So it does, it leaves a lot of food for thought, and it does make me think, where is the industry going to go? Because if it doesn't bring the price down, I cannot see heat pumps becoming, adopted by the masses with how it stands at the moment. But let me know down in the comments what you think of all that. Have you got a heat pump? How much did you pay for your install? And ultimately, who did you go with? I'd be very interested to know, because I may get a couple more quotes just to see if I can beat the 3 that I already got. But ultimately, it would have to be, as I said, I budgeted between 2,000 and 3,000 for this work. And, maybe that was naive and it was always going to be more. But that was just the kind of figure that, after doing a bit of research, that is what I came to and I thought was realistic. But anyway, let me know down in the comments what you think. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. And guys, I will catch you in the next one.